Real pleasure to be with you, and I have enjoyed the morning so much. The choir was wonderful, and it's so nice to have a congregation that sings out of the United Methodist hymnal. It feels like home. So it's really good to be with you and to share this time with you. As Tommy already pointed out, last Monday was a snow day, and I meandered through my neighborhood, which is on Capitol Hill. I work in the United Methodist building and live right there, and I hope that some of you will come to the building sometime and see the work of the Board of Church and Society. But on Monday, I was using that snow day as an opportunity for a walk, and I saw several dried out browning Christmas trees covered in snow set aside on the curb. It was evening, and there were a few windows where Christmas tree lights still shone. Few houses still had their lights around the entrance or down in front of the house along the railings. And there was a little part of me that said, I hope these stay up a few more weeks, so on my night walks I get to see light. Because these lights are warm and comforting in what to me feels like a pretty unsettled and chaotic world. The Feast of Epiphany brings the Christmas season to an end, and to mark the season and transition from Christmas to Epiphany, there's a wonderful poem that I love by Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman was the dean of the chapel at Boston University and the mentor for Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He was an African-American theologian, educator, and civil rights leader, and there will be on PBS very soon, I think like in 2 weeks, a story of his life. But he has a poem called The Work of Christmas. When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flocks, the work of Christmas begins. To find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among peoples, to make music in the heart. Since the beginning of Christianity, as well as since the beginning of the Methodist movement in America in the late 1700s, the business of finding the lost and healing the broken and feeding the hungry and rebuilding the nations and bridging and bringing peace, making music in our hearts, is our work. It is what we are called to do. This is the ministry of the whole church, and I now work, after having worked at Emory University for 23 years as the dean of the chapel there. I came to the Board of Church and Society because I have a passion for this kind of work. I am an outsider from Washington, so I had a lot to learn. But this work of church and society is very amazing and fulfilling and frustrating, and it gives me an opportunity to be with people in the churches. But people are always amazed and appreciative for the denomination's long commitment to social justice and to the issues that I am going to talk about a little bit this morning. Right now, our focus is on 5 areas: poverty, peace, health, immigration, and climate. We have a staff of 28 people, and that is a lot of work for 28 people. But we're connected to all the annual conferences in the churches and the connection both in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. And the connections on these 5 issues are very self-evident. Challenging the church to take seriously those caught in the cycle of poverty is one of the things that we do. Our founder, John Wesley, once said, "One great reason why the rich in general have so little sympathy for the poor is because they so seldom visit them. Hence it is one part of the world does not know what the other suffers." This insight of John Wesley speaks to many of the injustices today, because we may not have very strong friendships and relationships with those in prison, those caught in addiction, those struggling with poverty, those fleeing gangs, or those devastated by tsunamis, or children who are trafficked. Jesus calls us to be his followers in the world. I want to give you a little history. Some of you know this, but some of you may not. The United Methodist Social Principles came into being on April the 23rd, 1968. At the time of the uniting conference of the Methodist Church and the Evangelical United Brethren Church. For those of you who can think back to those days, this was 19 days after the assassination of Dr. King, whose life and legacy we remember today. The writers of the current social principles were guided by Dr. King's writing on the beloved community. So we see echoes and influences of Dr. King in the social principles, because they had been worked on for many years, but they came to be passed on that April day. The social principles are divided into 6 sections: the natural world, the nurturing community, the social community, the economic community, the political community, and the world community. Now, you have heard about 2 or 3 of the statements in the social principles, but actually there are 76 different issues that the church has taken seriously where we have social principles. Witness and action on social justice is in our Methodist DNA. I have brought some faith and facts cards, which I will leave with you. These are the pretty ones, but you can also get them on the website. These faith and facts cards take issues of various kinds. Let's say religious freedom. And on every card it says, what does the Bible say? What does the church say? You turn it over, and then what are the facts and what actions can you take? So the faith and facts cards we developed and designed to be useful in churches so you can have studies or you can know what the church is talking about. Now you can find these on our website, which is umcjustice.org. Today, you also have the offering envelope for Human Relations Day, which we receive a portion of that offering to help advance the work of community relations around the world. On the back of this Human Relations Day, you see the website, umcjustice.org. My feelings will not be hurt if you would like to go to your phone right now and look at the website. I want you to see it at some time. I want you to see the social principles. If you would like, I would like for you to sign up to receive the letters that I write about once a month. We have action alerts, so if something is happening that United Methodist can engage with quickly, there is a tab that you can click onto. And there is a wealth of material on all the issues I've mentioned, as well as the social principles. And most important, I want you to know the social principles so that you can tell your friends and neighbors about them. Many, many people say to me, I have never heard of the social principles. People like it when they read about them. They are written by General Conference, which meets every 4 years, through a somewhat democratic process. You will agree with everything you will not agree with everything in the social principles. I do not agree with everything in the social principles. They are a work of art around issues, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how they come to be. But they are thought through by United Methodists from around the world. The people of faith writing them, who are United Methodists, keep in mind the gospel reading that you heard this morning and the other teachings of Jesus. They understand their own situations and conditions in their hometowns and communities and countries, and they share their views in a room where they are talking about the social principles. The delegates to the General Conference, there are about 850, come from Africa, Asia, Europe, South, and North America. What values Jesus lives and preaches in the Sermon on the Mount are woven throughout the social principles. Imagine for a minute, if you will, of a room about 40 or 60 people talking about each of the particular social principles. These people in this room are from the Philippines, from Alabama, from Texas, from Virginia, from Southern California, from Liberia, from Cote d'Ivoire. And they are figuring out what to say about migration and how to help churches figure out ways to address immigration issues in their communities. In 2016, the General Conference passed a resolution that would be a thoughtful study document, if you wanted to do it, called Welcoming the Migrant. The opening words of that document are pretty inspiring. They say, from the dawn of creation, human beings have migrated across the earth. The history of the United States is a migration narrative of families and individuals seeking safety, economic betterment, and freedom of religion and cultural expression. The reason for those who migrated willingly are numerous and varied depending on the context. And it goes on for quite a while to talk about the issues of migration. I am going to talk about 3 issues this morning, and the first is the issue of migration, which is a huge issue worldwide. 244 million people are in a country other than the country they were born in. 65 million have been forced from their homes because of conflict or war, because of climate, or because of economic deprivation. There are 21 million refugees, and half of them are under 18 years of age. And it's the poor countries that look after the vast majority of the world's refugees. It is not the Western countries. So an example of that is many Syrian refugees are in the Middle East, perhaps in Europe, but not so many, but not so much in the U.S. Coming to the General Conference are 52 delegates from the Philippines. The situation in the Philippines is pretty critical. There are 10 million people from the Philippines, that's 10% of the population, who are migrant workers into other lands. I was a few years ago in the Tel Aviv airport. I had been to Israel, Palestine, and as I was leaving the country at the border, there was an entirely separate line for all of the Philippine workers. They come into the country to work, and then they have their way through their own line to leave, which is more expedited because they come and go to work in Israel. The good United Methodists from the Philippines contribute their experience in this conversation at General Conference. And they sit alongside of people from Texas who rely on migrants who are farm workers. And there are delegates from other states in that conversation that do not rely on migrant workers or suffer from the same kinds of issues. But together they work out the church's position on migration and immigration. And that's how that position comes to be. A second issue is related to poverty and migration, is that of human trafficking. The church's position is one that is important to know. In this area, meaning Northern Virginia, in this area of the country, there is a lot of human trafficking. The church's position states, we deplore all of the commercialization and exploitation of sex, with their consequent cheapening and degradation of human personality. To lose freedom and to be sold by someone else for sexual purposes is a form of slavery. And the facts are astounding. Nearly 21 million people are victims of labor trafficking, trapped in jobs by coercion or deceit. 44% have moved from their place of residence within their country across one or more national borders. Globally, forced labor and sex trafficking generates $150 billion of profits annually. There are two websites that you might find interesting. One is www.slaveryfootprint.org, and the other is polarisproject.org/state map. So it's also listed in the Faith and Facts cards, and I'm leaving you all some Faith and Facts cards with the ministers, and you can also get them on the website. But if you go to the Polaris Project, you can see what the statistics are for Virginia or West Virginia or any state in the country that you're interested in. One of the interesting things as the dean of the chapel at Emory University was that among the college population, evangelicals, Catholics, Protestants, young people were very interested in addressing this issue. It's an issue that they know about because they have sometimes seen it in school, and so it is a way in which young people can become involved in a really important issue. A third example of challenging our assumptions, even within our faith family, happens when we are in conversation with friends from around the world. Church and Society is working on revisions of the social principles for the 2020 General Conference next year. One of the ways that we've done that is we've brought together people from across the world to talk about the social principles as we engage in making them increasingly relevant, increasingly biblically and theologically grounded, and more succinct. These are not succinct documents, I would say. But there, in one of these conversations, was a conversation on eliminating plastic water bottles. And of course, everybody in the U.S. and everybody in Europe was very enthusiastic about this. But someone from a country in Africa spoke up and said, "Oh no, we cannot live without water bottles. Our water is so polluted, we would die if we did not have water bottles." We realized how much we take for granted where we live, unless we're in Flint, Michigan, or in West Virginia, and in some other parts of the world could not survive without water bottles. So we had to rethink how to address the issue. The United Methodist Church has been for 200 years and will continue to be a voice and community for those who suffer from domestic violence, from racism, and we had this terrible incident yesterday on the mall of Nathan Phillips, who was taunted by a young student. We suffer with those who are struggling with poverty, those living on the margins of life, those whose voices are silenced, children who cannot speak for themselves when they are separated from their parents, and that happens around the world. We stand with young people who do not want to be alone or isolated or lonely, and sometimes who resort to suicide. These young people do not want to face the possibility of violence in their own lives, in their schools, with their friends. We advocate for those living with addiction, those who live with mental illness, and those in their families who have Alzheimer's. The first week in Advent, I had the privilege of doing a prayer at the National Vigil for those lost by gun violence. There were about 100 families in this church that were gathered, and these families had photographs of their loved one that had been killed in gun violence. There were small children and teenagers and parents and friends. Some people had lost as many as 3 people. There was a young woman who stood to tell her story of her sister Sarah. Sarah had died at the age of 10 on March the 13th, 1996, at the Dublin Primary School in Scotland. Some of you may remember that. Sarah died with other young children, like at Sandy Hook, very tragically. Her sister stood to tell us about Sarah, saying that she did not want Sarah to be remembered by her death, but rather by her life, even if it was only 10 years. She made us smile and laugh with the zany and delightful stories of Sarah's witty art and creative peanut butter sandwiches that she had made as a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old and a 9-year-old. It is a wonderful Advent and Christmas and Epiphany and Christian story that our lives, however short or however long, are called to be about life for all of God's family. The Sermon on the Mount ends with that beautiful affirmation: you are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid, nor not one lighting a lamp puts it under a bushel, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. Let your light shine before others, so that they may see your works and give glory to God. Amen.